Season's greetings and welcome to another Stompy 51 miniature adventure. Without casting any cultural aspersions as to what is and isn't a barbarian, we'll be looking at my very extensive and of course wholly unpainted 1990s metal barbarian collection. But before we dive into the box of barbarians, what was important to me was actually finding some kind of mechanism, some kind of rule system to bring out games of the crazed psychos bashing each other about. And I had a little look online, and the one that seemed to me to be the simplest, most straightforward, but most sandboxy and malleable was the Sword Weirdos game, which I paid $4 or $5 for, I think $5 for, on War Games Vault. And I just printed it out. That's the idea. So I can print out a few copies for my mates and myself. It seems to work on a similar set of principles in this regard to Boroughs and Badgers, where it's not, strength 3, strength 4, strength 5, etc., like fixed numbers like in the Games Workshop games that I'm very familiar with. Instead, the better your characteristic in something is, the higher you ratchet up which dice you use. So if you're a total muppet, presumably you use a D4. Average guy, I guess, is a D6. D8, you're pretty good. D10, you're hot stuff. And D12, you're some kind of demon, I'm guessing. And that's how things work. You ratchet up and down with a die type shift. The models have attributes. They have a speed. And it's 1, 2, or 3, but each of those represents a stick of 5 inches. So 3 presumably means you can pelt it across at 15. You can move it up to 15, but the thing is, we'll come to it in a minute. There it is. In your activation phase, you can take 3 actions in your turn: move, hit someone, shoot someone, reload, disengage, cast a spell, recover, which is, I think, shaking off being staggered, like a pinning kind of mechanism, and interact, I suppose, if you just grab something and stand up. So you've got a defense and a might characteristic, and fighting is basically a roll-off between that, like an attack and defense, and willpower is like a morale characteristic, which I think decides whether you can recover or not, and that's, you can have a go at recovering off the back of that. And every turn you roll for initiative to see who gets to move a character first, and then you alternate. Everyone gets to move. You move a figure, I move a figure, you move a figure, I move a figure. And I find that kind of thing is most fun, rather than watching and going for a coffee while someone moves their entire army. Albeit here, I think you're not talking about more than about 10 miniatures. We spoke about movement. We spoke about how melee is the difference between might and defense. And that difference gives rise to a number. And that's quite fun. So if you haven't managed to make much of a difference between you and the opponent, then they get to thump you back. If you made a bit of a difference, but not much, they get to thump you back at a bit of a modifier. They might be able to break away from you. You might be able to knock them over. And then they have to spend time standing up. And then we get to down, staggered, or out of action. Out of action, obviously, we understand they're knocked out. And then somewhere here it explains what down and staggered is. Down and staggered. Down, they have to spend an action standing up. So I suppose it's not that bad. They just knock down and they kind of roll over and jump up. But staggered means you put a marker next to them, a token, and they can't do anything except try to recover. But I think you can't just recover. You've got to make your will roll, and then you can stand up. So I suppose you're bricking yourself. And then we come to the fun stuff, because, I do tend to spend more time pulling together warbands than actually playing anything. But hey, that's part of the hobby. What you see is what you get. I'm all about that. All models have a class. Some are rarer than others. Some you can only have 1 or 2 of them. You can buy them weapons. And then there are these maneuver points. And again, I'm sure I've seen that mechanism in a few Games Workshop games, which suggests equally they could have nicked it from somewhere else. But that's to make it more interesting. You get some discretionary points every turn to do something cool. And I think here, it was at the beginning somewhere, maneuver points, somewhere at the beginning here. Thank you for your patience. You gain 2 maneuver points per round of a 75-point game, 3 for a 100-point game, 4 for a 125-point game, and then you lose the what you got to use them in the turn or they're lost. Well, there's a whole list of maneuvers in here somewhere. I don't know if everyone gets all the maneuvers. I think they're attached to weapons or potentially fighters. So anyway, so here are the classes of people you can use. So I'm interested in obviously Barbarian, and these are the weapons they can buy from the different categories of weapon. +1 to will rolls, so they've got a lot of willpower, and if they're within 2.5 inches, half a stick of an enemy, they can just go and run into base-to-base contact. Berserker, they just automatically jump back up, and they are worse at defending, which is very Berserker, isn't it? Because they just run around with their bare pelts but get shot to death. Druids, why not? I haven't really looked into the magic rules in this. I imagine they are not game-changing. Pit fighter. I don't think you can use pit fighters in a barbarian faction. We'll come to it. They've got rules there if you just want to have some kind of terrifying demon. But here are the different weapon types. Clubs, maces, spears. These are the kind of things I can imagine using. And I'm not going to look all these up, but you know, you've got piercing, +1 reach. We can guess what these things do. Javelin or spear, only medium range for chucking. Throwing axe, short range. Shield is a defensive item. Slashing and thrusting swords. I can't imagine to be prejudiced against barbarians. They'll be doing too much sword fencing. And some magical items. Ooh, gory trophy. Get to taunt the enemy. So these are so these are maneuvers, and so I think you can presumably spend a point and rally or taunt someone or riposte or smash. Who doesn't like smash? Weapon properties. These don't seem to be the same as maneuvers. I think you just get these. This model receives a +1 bonus to defensive rolls if they're defensive. Okay. I think those just might be automatic, but don't take my word for it. This is giving you a sense of it. Maneuvers. Okay. Block, burst, cure, distract, drag, empower. That's a magical thing. Enhance, hasten, rally, prognosticate. Before any player makes a roll, add +1 or -1 to the roll. Interesting. Parry. Okay, so fair enough. So if you spend points, throw, you can use those. And then leader traits, things that make your leader a bit more monstrous or noble or majestic. Mage killer. So actually it looks like there's quite a lot of onion layers in what seems to be a pretty small system. So tribal, I go for tribal. All warband members must be barbarians. No problem there. Beasts, berserkers, and hunters. Great. +1 to might with 2-handed weapons. Great, we just need to give everyone a 2-handed weapon. And that's basically it. Right, so now the moment we've all been waiting for, and whether we need to, and if we've been trying to work out whether we have sufficiently decent light. I mean, look, you make kids a desk from IKEA and they just trash it, but they're out, and so as far as I'm concerned, this is now my desk. Let's see if we can get these figures into some decent light and focus. That's reasonable. All right, so this box is full of various barbarians I've been swapping for or purchasing secondhand, first-hand, trade shows, whatever, for the last 20 years, some of which aren't specifically designed to be barbarians. So you'll recognize these as Mark Copplestone barbarians, which I think are sold, sorry, they're not barbarians, they're sold as cavemen. But what are cavemen if not barbarians? I mean, I've always loved all of those podcasts which talk about really ancient history, because everyone obviously knows about Middle Eastern really ancient history, but European really ancient history is quite fun, because we assume that we're in this world of really high-end technology. And we're aware of the Celts and the Gauls and all that. But all of this went back, if Ur of the Chaldees or whatever went back 10,000 years, you know, there were people walking around with some sophistication, we assume, even if not massive cities, around Europe. And on one of the podcasts I was listening to, they explained, you know, none of the stuff was written down, but they found the scene of some big battle in Germany. Well, a big-ish battle. It sounds like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. And in this battle, there was a number of people who were dead, all had DNA from like the same 2 villages and very similar kinds of weapons with metal from around those villages. But the people who had come to attack them, of which many more were dead, seemed to have DNA from a much wider spread, including potentially some mercenaries. And the metal in their weapons came from like all of Western Europe. And so they surmised that basically it was just some kind of imperial outstretch, like a kind of Walking Dead thing where someone with a much bigger kingdom decided to go and smash up some little kingdom. And they've been able to work all of that out just from the archaeology. Anyway, so these are Copplestone castings, Barbarians. I think this is when Copplestone did some work for Grenadier in 1991, because that's what it said underneath their bases. And you can still buy these now, but I think they're perfectly in keeping. Albeit he obviously is a bit more kind of 1990s metal heroic. But aren't they beautiful? I mean, I recognised as I went through these that you sometimes forget these are all just art. So I think we'll just start lining them up on their 30mm bases, because again, I've had such battles of the bases in my time, and I've come to the conclusion that unless the rule system demands it and there are miniatures bespoke for that rule system, if you're going for miniatures agnostic, square bases in fantasy, because that means you can play in different systems. Some systems don't expect you to have any basing formula at all. I think Sword Weirdos doesn't expect it. But one day if I do something which does, like, you know, Vanguard, I think it is, for the Mantic Kings of War kind of smaller scale skirmish, well, that does expect you to have square bases. Well, this maximizes what I can use them for. This guy is, it was Harlequin miniatures, now sold by Orbis. It only took me a year to get my order and about 100 emails begging, but I got it. And amongst other things, I threw in some of these Kev Adams Barbarians. And they are big, chunky fellows. And normally, I get annoyed when people say, oh, you know, you can mix different manufacturers, different people of different sizes, and that's all true. But often miniatures don't really look like they are in keeping with one another. But actually, I think every single one of these miniatures, possibly, you know, they could be used together. Once they're painted in my, you know, straightforward, unexciting, but largely compatible style, I think no one would notice that they weren't all naturally... Bedfellows is the wrong phrase, of course, but, you know, in the same tribe. Then a load of these actually are, what are they called? Are they sold by Scotia Grendel? I can't remember exactly. There's a system called I-Core, which I never played. I remember walking around Salute in maybe 2000, 1999, and they were demoing this game I-Core. I think I picked up a few then, and I've swapped for more since. And they seem to have a lot of young ladies with humongous swords, and then some big guys. And I don't know if, I can't remember if some of them are from an undead faction, because he seems to be walking around like some kind of muscle zombie, or just someone who's thick. But if I paint him normally, no one will be able to tell that he's fine. Actually, maybe they are the zombies, because that sword is supposed to look a little bit kind of degraded. But, you know, it's the ancient world. And I think swords were seen as magical because they would kind of use kind of long coils of metal in the beginning and then hammer them together, kind of knitting them together to make these swords. And so that's why they were felt to be magical and have their own kind of heroic essence and then get passed from generation to generation. And maybe this is just an old sword. Who am I kidding? He looks like he's a walking zombie. But anyway, maybe he's just not quite with the program. And as you can see so far, all totally in keeping. I think that's I-Core again, albeit they start to take on quite a strong kind of Irish Celtic fringe. Sense. And when I say they all fit in, I think the icon miniatures are mostly by someone called is a Kev White. And I mean, he's very technically accurate, but I find his stuff a little bit on the small and fiddly side. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's pretty gorgeous. I don't like bending stuff. But do we think that's supposed to be straight? It does look a lot better straight. I mean, you don't want to get hit by that. That definitely looks like an ensorcelled weapon. And they've all been practicing their karate moves. I'm sure I remember one of them from when I was a kid. You sort of had a jab forward. And I remember being told that all the moves envisaged you having a weapon or not having a weapon. Now she looks like a hunter. He's a Copplestone figure, that's Kev White. And again, no reason they couldn't go together. I suppose he'd be a javelin man. And he's Perry. So, yeah, must be some kind of Perry Viking. And whereas I suppose the real barbarians are all half naked, walking up and down the plains, this fella maybe is a thrall. He's been captured from the edge of some city-dwelling tribe. Because again, one thing that's been impressed upon me by all these history podcasts is that you would look at these steppe nomads, for example, and think that they were just self-sufficient, riding around their little ponies and drinking horse milk. And the reality was that they existed in trade, being complementary to cities and settled peoples with farms, because they would each have something the other needed, even if they chose different lifestyles. And I suppose even when you look at the Hyperborea, I can't remember what it's called, in Conan, they do seem to, when the story starts, you see these kind of barbarians just walking around the plains on their own, fighting lizardmen and tigers and things, but ultimately there are these huge cities which they meander out of and trade with. Anyway, so some of these ladies are carrying shields, which I bought on Lead Adventure Forum from someone flogging them, but I'm pretty sure that they were the Stonehenge sort of era Europeans. So they're kind of very simple metalworking. And I thought they'd be quite suitable for these. Another Kev White lady. A Kev Adams Harlequin miniature. And he again is absolutely humongous, with a Foundry Viking shield and a flail. And he seemed to me to have obvious leadership potential. I mean, would you mess with him? I wouldn't mess with him. As far as I'm concerned, that dude stands up, says he's the boss. He's the boss. I thought they'd be more useful, but there were some of these lovely, again, 10,000 BC European shields attached to the plastic skeleton kit by Oathsworn. Is it Oathmark? I can't remember the Nick at North Star series. When Nick McCulloch did a mass skirmish game, small battles game, and everyone was on 30mm bases, and they made some lovely elves, and I'm sure it's Oathmark. Lovely elves, some lovely undead, and the undead seem to be dressed in this European ancient history kind of armor, as you would be. That's another brilliant miniature. Let's see. Unfortunately, it's very hard to bring up things that are painted black. I hope you can get a sense of it. That's very good. And that's a Kev White one. Another massive Kev White one with a very big set of hands and a big sword. I think unfortunately whoever had this before me decided it was a great idea to cut off the horns and the helmet, which I think would have made this much more interesting. So I had to file those down to make the hack job look all right. That's a Copplestone miniature, Grenadier Games 1991. And I found these really cool 30mm bases with the slot in the middle by Hobby Heaven. Because the only thing about the Games Workshop ones is that, you know, they just have a diagonal line. Albeit, these really old Games Workshop ones, what's this, 1991, they seem to have gone through a period of having them both. And their one is better because the slot is set towards the back. Whereas actually, this only worked if the miniature was quite small, or it didn't look odd if it was slightly to the front of the base. But on some of them, it was better just to snip it off and put it at the back. I mean, here's a good example. He looks just about all right, but look how much is now behind him. I have to put a rock there. I mean, I know one guy at the very local gaming store, and he always centers his miniatures like wrong on the base, and he sort of explains it as some kind of, you know, tendentious realism, like, well, you know, they'll be standing wherever they're standing, and then he just fills it up with rocks and grass and stuff. But I think each one, maybe it's the part of me that's slightly on the spectrum, but I just look at it and it looks wrong. You know, to my mind, something's got to be aesthetically sitting in the right place of the base. Now, you can put them to the right a bit if they've got something filling out the rest of the space, but if they don't, I think they've got to be in the middle. He looks like he's got leadership potential as well. Now, often when I do these videos, I tell you these are likely never to get painted, but I do hope one day to paint these. You know, barbarians are not hard to paint. And it looks like you're going to have hours of fun with them. That's another Copplestone fella. And I'm sure that's another I-Core miniature. Some looking a lot more Celtic than others. And certainly fantasy Celtic. I mean, that's a fantastically humongous sword. I'm losing track of how many we've got in here. I mean, there's still a lot more to go in the box. He's another Kev Adams big fella. Actually, it's getting too dark. I mean, I tell you, it's the UK and it's the middle of the afternoon. They came with these shields and I didn't use them mostly because I thought they looked a bit too advanced. But I didn't have another shield that was plausible on him. And so I just plonked him with that one. You know, because he's a huge fella. I mean, huge, more huge as against some of the ladies. But then again, you know, no matter how able they are at combat, you know, this fella, he could just be huge. And it reminded me of when I was little in Sunday school. We learned, I think, about, was it Joshua's spies? He sends some spies to go into the, oh no, hang on. Some spies get sent into the land of Canaan by the Israelites, and they come back and they moan and say, we can't go in there because the Canaanites are giants. And I remember saying to the teacher, how can they be giants? Because I had in my mind's eye the Norse idea of giants. And she said he didn't mean, you know, giants as we understand them, or as Norse mythology tells us. He just meant that they were flipping enormous, and he didn't quite fancy going in there to fight them. Sorry, I'm trying to get this in focus and give you a sense of it. I mean, Kev Adams, he can do goblins, but his humans are pretty good. Not bad at all. Then I signed up a few years ago to a Barbaric Splendor, it was called, Barbaric Splendor Kickstarter. And it was some poor fellow who decided to bite off more than he could chew. And it took him years to fulfill it. But he was an honourable guy. And he did ultimately fulfill it. And there was something like 5 to 7 quid each. And I think the sculptor was, I think it was various sculptors. But one guy was, I don't know how to pronounce it, Boris. I don't know where he's from. But he is a fantastic sculptor. And again, he sculpted all the stuff largely in the style of these 1990s barbarians. Oops, I plunked a few there at the back. and they look all right. And again, magical two hands, which in these rules suggests they get some advantage. And I think these are slightly Celtic looking Kev White miniatures. And I'll zoom out so you can see how we're doing. That's how we're doing. But that is not all. No, that is not all. This one I didn't particularly like, on the right. This was one of the Kev Adams ones, because I understand they had to put them flat to get into the mould and keep it simple. But it doesn't look quite right, because who wears an axe like that? I don't know, he looks like a plastic miniature, really, from Talisman or something. And he's got one of those Wargames Foundry ancient European shields. He's another Barbaric Splendor fellow. And that's another Copplestone Grenadier 1991 figure. Oh, I think they're entirely in keeping. I mean, this guy's clearly been working out. But, you know, people do, and maybe they get small pinheads as they do. And whereas before, I was poo-pooing giving them a fencing sword, I mean, this fellow seems to be quite into his Achilles type Troy prancing back and forth. Sorry to knock the screen. As I always say, if you want high production values, go watch Harry Potter. Or I was watching the very poignant Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And that had very high production quality, but was so depressing. So this guy's another Barbaric Splendor fellow, and I'm sure that that's just a rip-off of a gladiator helmet. Mermillo or something, who knows? Albeit he has managed to slice someone's head off. And he's also got a two-handed axe. And let's see how he looks scale-wise. Let's put against another Barbaric Splendor fellow. They obviously look fine. But how does he look against a Copplestone guy? Perfectly in keeping, I would say. I mean, that's a Copplestone Grenadier guy. And then I had some of these Saxons, which don't really look in keeping. But again, I thought to myself, they can just be thralls, you know. They don't really fight like a barbarian in the tribe, but they've been brought in and just handed a bow and told, don't get involved too much, just stick at the corner and just keep shooting. Another Barbarian by Grenadier. This one's got a bow. I mean, I think you can definitely buy these. Someone started selling them on eBay and has a little store. Don't know how they got the license. I think you used to have to go to some Irish company and get them. Oops. Well, one day maybe I will get more, albeit, I mean, do I need more barbarians than that? But I think we'll leave it there. Please leave me the ultimate seasonal gift of subscribing. Bit of fun, leave me a comment. Otherwise, keep well, keep safe, and come back soon.